Hi guys, welcome to the channel. This is What If Goku Was in Fairy Tail. Before we start, remember to like and subscribe to help the channel. Also check the description for the creator of the fanfic.
Chapter 37. The Red Key Part 6. Back in black, Kagura had to force down the urge to shudder as the spirit's eyes roved up and down her figure. She had heard of the lion spirit's playboy nature in passing, but now his mere presence felt perverse. Just being near him made her want to throw on another layer of clothing, and her entire body felt disgusting enough to warrant at least 3 showers. But that was all nothing compared to when he finally began to speak. Mid-C cups, bound enough by the uniform to be mistaken as a large B. With age, likely to end within the low D range. An athletic figure, though not fully developed as well as it could be. More like a traveler with combat abilities than a truly honed warrior. Prim backside, well-toned. All in all, very high-quality meat. He spoke in a monotone, completely matter-of-fact. If it wasn't for the slight upturn of his lips, she might have believed it had come from some sort of doctor giving her a physical. Now though, she was unable to suppress the shudder a second time. The second her body began to move, Leo struck. The spirit raised his fist into the empty air between them, and before Kagura could even process what was happening, she had been yanked through the air and her body slammed straight into her outstretched limb. The girl collapsed to the ground, retching from the unexpected gut shot, and with a flick of his finger she was propelled straight out the door and back into the street. Leo calmly walked out after her and used his powers to restore the door behind him. There, now Mistress can continue working in peace. More importantly, it will give us some alone time, he said. With a snarl, Kagura leapt at the man only to find her personal gravity shut off, leaving her flailing helplessly above his head. The spirit aimed his finger downwards and she slammed into the sidewalk. He slowly moved his finger side to side and Kagura was helplessly dragged back and forth across the street, unable to free herself. Another swish of his finger sent her headfirst into a light pole. Into the guild's wall, into the air, high above the buildings. Back to the street, straight through a window of a neighboring building. Finally, out of the lion's line of sight, she could feel his power over her body vanish. Her mind immediately tried to figure out some way that she could use that to her advantage, but before she could do anything, a low moan echoed around her throughout the building. Kagura's eyes darted around the building wildly for any sign of the source before she noticed tiny cracks appearing all up and down the walls. Her eyes widened in realization the same moment that the building collapsed on top of her. Leo nodded to himself and wandered onto the ruins, idly poking around at the shattered wood and debris with his toe. His nose twitched. He could smell the girl, a wondrous cocktail of sweat, adrenaline, and fear. It was enough to make his mouth water. His eyes locked onto a small pile of shingles and timber that had a small speck of liquid red splashed beside it, and he began to make his way over. As he approached, the sudden sound of ripping metal tore through the air and Leo spun to see a makeshift spear rocketing towards his gut. He casually snagged the weapon out of the air and made it compress to the size of a marble, but in that same instant the rubble pile was blown apart and Kagura emerged, her right hand glowing blue. The key blast rocketed towards his head and Kagura smiled in grim satisfaction. Then the air had distorted. A ripple opened up in the space between them, sucking up the key blast before it could reach its target. He had opened up a hole in the very air itself to suck up her attack. Kagura reared back as pitch-black eyes danced across her body once more. A small smile graced the spirit's face and then she was suffocating. Kagura's tie had ripped itself free from her shirt and pulled itself straight up into the air, dragging her a foot off the ground alongside it like a hangman's noose. Her hands pawed fruitlessly at the fabric that was digging into her throat, cutting off her air. Her legs kicked uselessly at the air as the veins on her forehead began to bulge. A trio of key bolts launched across the distance between them only to vanish into spatial distortion. The spirit hissed at the attempt and with a jerk of his finger he had the tie take her even higher. Her sword cluttered to the ground as both hands scratched desperately at the fabric. With no options left, her hands glowed blue. A point-blank, low-powered key blast straight to her own neck. The fabric around her was instantly incinerated while the rest went fluttering away in the wind. Kagura collapsed coughing, her head in agony. The blast had left burns across her throat, red throbbing skin that sang with agony just from casual contact with the air. When she finally managed to force down her pain and take in her surroundings, Leo was looming over her. Kagura froze when she saw the spirit. He was less than a foot away from her, just staring down with an unmoving leer. Unconsciously she followed her gaze and flinched when she saw what he was staring at. The ki blast had destroyed not only her tie, but most of her shirt. What remained was just barely enough to preserve her modesty, and the spirit's gaze was clearly exploring her exposed flesh. Her violent shiver alerted him to her consciousness. Smooth and unflawed, unlike many other combatants. None of the scars one could expect a warrior to have. He grinned, tongue flicking out to lick his lips. A pleasant surprise. It almost physically pains me that I shall not have the opportunity to enjoy it. Though, maybe once Mistress finds a way to overcome your defenses, your new tenant will be more appreciative of my efforts. RRRAAAAGH. Kagura forgot all about her magic, she forgot all about her blade. With a speed she had never summoned before, she shot straight up to her feet and slugged the corrupted spirit straight across the jaw. An arc of blood escaped the lion's mouth as his head snapped backwards, again and again as Kagura unleashed all of her anger on his face. With an enraged snarl the spirit lashed out, backhanding the girl in the side of the face to send her tumbling back to the ground. She quickly scrambled back to her knees to charge again when the gravity around her quadrupled. She was pressed flat to the ground, and her very bones creaked under the pressure. Her insides wailed in protest as her bones pushed down on her organs. With what little focus she could muster, she reached out with her powers one last time. Leo let out a cry of surprise as the shredded remains of Kagura's tie smacked him right over the eyes. He stumbled back in surprise just as Kagura's hand closed around the hilt of archenemy. The corrupt spirit managed to get himself free just in time to see the upward slash catch him in the groin and slice upwards and the way through his body until it came up between his eyes. Then his body fell apart in a shower of light. Kagura stood panting and winced. The power of her sword had carried on far past the initial cut, and now every house along the rest of the street had collapsed in on itself. With any luck, the damage would be blamed on the demons. Or maybe the other fairies, that seemed more likely. She looked at the wreckage, and then turned back towards the guild once more. For the second time the entrance was crushed under her high-powered gravity as she forced her way into the building. She had charged halfway across the room before Flute even had a chance to turn around to acknowledge her presence. The demon raised a brow in surprise for just an instant before she raised a finger straight at the girl's heart. There was a flash of light, a brief impact, and then Kagura hit the ground hard enough to break her nose. Flute looked over the downed girl and laughed. Now you just stay right there, and as soon as I'm finished with this we will sit down together and I'll figure out how to get one of my babies inside of you. She said sweetly before turning away. Kagura blinked the stars from her eyes and snorted the blood from her nose. She tried to push herself to her feet but found she couldn't move her arms. She looked down and paused, bewildered. It's called the clothes beam. Weird move, right? I still don't know why Gramdipier ever made it. But I must say, a straight jacket is a good look for you. The demon continued laughing to herself right up until Kagura used her gravity magic to launch herself like a torpedo head first into Lucis' jaw. The two collapsed in a tangle of limbs, and Kagura made use of the close contact to bite down hard on the blonde's shoulder. Flute cried out in pain as Kagura tore into her flesh before she sent the dark-haired girl flying with a pulse of magic. You bitch, you think you're so clever, pulling that crap. I'll tear you too. Lightning Kamehameha. A blue and yellow beam punched straight through the wall and blasted the demon out of the guild and towards the sea. Goku and Laxus walked into the building side by side, nodding in contentment at the satisfyingly dramatic entrance. When he spotted her on the ground, Goku walked over and began to rip her free. Nice job holding the fort here, kid, Laxus said, but if you don't mind, the real powerhouses will be taking it from here. Elfman didn't know that Mirajane had rejoined the battle until she swooped down from the sky to slam her heeled boot into his furry throat. Almost a ton of muscled monster was sent crashing to the ground by a demon girl weighing just barely over 100 pounds. Elfman roared in agony and blindly lashed, knocking her back through air. He clambered to his feet and prepared to go after the creature that dared to strike him before his eyes actually fell on his opponent. The shock of seeing his sister in fighting form for the first time in years was enough to startle him out of his guard, and Mira capitalized, charging straight in to drop a downward heel kick straight to his forehead. Even as he smashed into the concrete, Mirajane was launching herself towards her next target, firing a concentrated blast of purple magic at a baseball bat that appeared to be hovering in midair. See-Through barely managed to even attempt to get out of the way, and just a glancing blow was enough to send him crashing through a wall. Before his bat even had time to hit the ground, Mirajane had swooped down and snatched it up before taking to the air once more. She came up directly behind Spike the vampire and his succubus companion, and with a single blow sent both of them hurtling back to the ground. The bat followed them down so fast that it caught fire, smashing into Evergreen's face right between the eyes. As the girl collapsed, concussed and unconscious, the delighted cries of several dozen demons rose up into the air as they suddenly found themselves freed from their petrification. Laughing to herself, the demoness began circling the battlefield from above, firing down at any monster that caught her attention. Bandages let loose an enraged roar when he saw a group of Anubits incinerated in one of her attacks and threw up dozens of lines to try and ensnare her. The demon within Mirajane saw the attack coming and had a vague flash of recognition from its host. With a grin, the demon allowed the wrapping to capture her arms and legs. With an elated yell, Bandages began to try and reel her in, and for a few moments she allowed herself to be pulled closer. She waited, in fact, right up until the moment that she could see the smile on his face and the white in his eyes. "You realize that this body was strong enough to defeat you as a prepubescent, correct?" the demon said cheerfully. Bandage's eyes had just scrunched up in confusion when she took to the sky, flying the mummy behind her like an oversized kite. Snarling, the ancient creature unleashed even more wrappings to try and tangle up her wings. Mira easily juked and dived out of the way, leaving them blowing like streamers in the wind. She dragged him along higher and higher into the air until they actually broke the crimson cloud line. For a brief moment, everything around them was blue. The sun shined down on the pair, bathing them in its light. Mirajane paused in her ascent and momentum carried Bandages to float up right alongside her. Then the demoness spun around and planted her open palm atop the mummy's face. Bandages tried to scream through her glowing purple hand as her power racked through his body, but even as he tried to free himself they began to descend. Bandages' cries to desperate as Mirajane pushed her full speed into their fall and the mummy's back lit up with a cone of fire. When the pair struck the ground, the resulting shockwave knocked every last fighter off their feet. A crater, 5 yards across and almost as deep, had been carved into the ground within the city's marketplace. There, Mirajane rose to her feet as she brushed a few stray bandages from her form before taking back to the sky. In the crater itself, there was nothing left but ruined cloth and a pile of antique dust. Bandages the mummy was no more. Freed and Bixlow were the next to try and stop her rampage. Dark Acature. Darkness. Freed's roar was accompanied by a pillar of black light that stretched out towards the heavens. Mirajane's eyebrow quirked up when she saw the winged, muscled figure emerge from within the dark. His eyes glowed with a lethal light as he took off into the sky, accompanied by a quartet of singing puppet heads. Darkness Stream. A half-dozen tendrils of black magic burst from the seal before Mirajane's hand and rushed out to meet her attackers. Freed punched straight through the two that were aimed his way, while one of the puppets was able to break free with a beam of green energy. The other three were not so lucky. In the span of 3 seconds they were wrapped up in the demonic power before exploding. Mirajane vanished in a burst of speed and snagged the last puppet from behind and smashed it apart against Freed's face before she kicked him back down towards the streets. The Thunder Tribe mage managed to pull himself out of his fall and rocketed back up towards Mirajane just as she was charging up another attack. Evil Explosion. Freed juked out of the way of the sphere of negative energy and slammed his fist straight into the demoness jaw. Mirajane flew backwards just as her attack detonated in the distance. With a roar, Freed continued, engulfing his fists in glowing spheres before charging in to pound away at Myra's defenses with everything he had. The girl was knocked back and forth across the sky by the brutal assault, but even as he fought to gain dominance, Mira was still smirking at him. The girl darted back out of range and waggled a finger back towards the ground. More specifically, towards the place where her attack had landed. Freed glanced down and was greeted with sight of the ruins of a toy store. Bixlow was laid out in what little remained of the stuffed animal display, right beside what likely would have been his new hosts for his babies. Freed snarled and turned back to the battle, only to find Mirajane's outstretched hands mere inches away from his face. And here's the trifecta, Soul Extinctor. The inky purple blast lit up the sky, throwing up a whirlwind of dust and debris so great that it covered the entire city. When the smoke cleared, the pair were back on the ground. Mirajane stood over the prone form of Freed, who lay unconscious and had reverted back to his normal appearance. The girl raised her hand up to finish him off, but before she got the chance she was bowled over by half a ton of angry man. The Strauss siblings squared off in what would be their first time in years. The first time since they had both lost a part of themselves and had been thrown upon new paths in their lives. Elfman stared at the thing that was wearing his sister's face and felt contempt bubbling up within his chest. The demon, for its part, just smiled patiently. It knew fully well that their battle could only have one end. It was willing to take the time to enjoy itself. Elfman lunged forward, throwing all of his weight and power behind a single massive right hook. Mirajane caught the punch an inch from her face with her bare palm and started to squeeze. Elfman's face contorted at the sudden pressure and he tried to pull away, but her grip was too tight. His attempt at a speedy left jab was equally fruitless and then he was trapped. Mirajane slowly began to increase the pressure, twisting Elfman's wrists so that his elbows were pointed straight down and then redirected her efforts upward. His joints felt like liquid fire under the pressure, and he was slowly forced up onto tiptoes just to try and keep his bones from snapping. Desperate, Elfman suddenly cancelled his transformation. His build shrank down just enough for him to pull free, and lack of resistance threw Mira off balance. That brief moment of hesitation gave Elfman the opening he needed to slam his fist into her face. Mirajane caught the blow on her forehead and failed budge. "Oh, please tell me that you can do better than that." "I hardly felt it," Elfman roared, and the beast heeded his call. His shift into the creature was finished just in time for his attack to land, and he punched her straight through a nearby fruit stand. "Better," the demon chuckled. "Now, can you keep it up?" In the blink of an eye she closed the gap and delivered a trio of punches so hard that the monster was driven to his knees. Taking advantage of his position, he made a quick attempt to try and punch her legs out from under her, but his sister was too quick. She hopped right up over his fist and landed lightly on his back. "I'm honestly curious, how is it that you never managed to close the distance between this body and your own in all the years that she was inactive? You're a bit pathetic, aren't you?" she exclaimed gleefully. "I'm still trying to work out how you managed to take over a demon takeover mage." He shot back before throwing himself up into the air with the intent of dislodging her. The demon merely used the momentum to swing her legs up around the beast's throat and slam him into the ground. "Ack, damn it, Mira, would you cut it out?" the teen shouted. "You know she can't hear you, right? I'm not actually Mira." "Like hell she can't. My sister is the manliest takeover mage on the planet, you can't even compare." Inside Mira's mind, a small thump was heard from within the second unchained coffin. The green creature that was inhabiting her brain looked the box over curiously and began to make its way over. Mira's ear twitched as she dodged another punch, and without a second of hesitation she launched herself straight up into the air. An instant later a blast of fire and ice crashed against Elfman's chest and sent him hurtling down the street. From her elevated position she easily caught sight of Gray and Natsu. "Really?" the demon sighed. "Okay, evil explosion." Gray threw up the strongest ice barrier he could, but in his weakened state he couldn't stop her. The two teens were blasted away and sent bouncing down the street. Chuckling to herself, Mirajane prepared to chase after them when a manhole cover smashed into the back of her head. The demon whirled around to see Elfman grinning up at her. As the demon approached, the door thumped again and slowly began to creak open. There was a glint of light and a flash of silver, though shadows made it impossible to make out more. Mirajane rocketed down with a flying knee that knocked her brother for a loop and sent him bouncing down the street. The man rolled back up as quick as possible and charged forwards, but every punch he threw was dodged with casual contempt. A little girl with snow-white hair stepped from the coffin. She was dressed in nothing but rags, and for a moment the demon thought that this might be some long-forgotten memory, or perhaps a childish demon, but the cold look in her eyes and the gruesome-looking butcher's knife in her hand spoke otherwise. Don't, Mirajane deflected another blow and kicked out Elfman's knee. The teen collapsed with a grunt, but the demon's left hand shot out caught him by the throat. The teen was suspended up into the air, flailing helplessly against her grasp. Her other hand was held up and coated with magic, looking like a glowing knife. Slowly, she reared back like a viper preparing to strike. "Don't you dare hurt my little brother." The little girl was suddenly on top of the green creature, burying a cleaver into his chest. The demon tried to step back, to escape, but the knife came down again. And again, and again. The demon began to fall apart, melting and oozing down even as it tried to flee further into the graveyard. The little Mira reared back her arm and threw the knife as hard as she could. With a loud thump, it buried itself up to the hilt in the back of the creature. With a final shriek it liquefied and sunk into the grass. In the very corner of her mind, a small sphere left by the demon shot out a wave of energy. A small bundle of memory was wrapped up and contained, everything that had transpired in the mindscape, everything that had been done by the demon's hand were ripped away. Mira felt the tendril slip into her head and tear the memories from her mind, but did not care. Whatever was happening outside, she knew was free. Above the screams, above the flash of spells and roar of battle, a robed figure floated serenely onward. It floated past demons, monsters, and mages unseen, working its way to the wreckage of a building that was burning wherever it wasn't frozen. If any had been watching, they would have seen the flames lick at the tiny robes and gutter out, almost as if they were ashamed to have dared touch them. The robed figure came to a stop before a frozen woman. A delicate hand rose from its cloak and traced a wickedly point nail across the frozen face. The ice hissed, melting away beneath the touch, and the woman gasped, brilliant scarlet hair clinging to her face as she gulped for air. After a few moments, the woman's eyes regained their focus. "I'll kill them," she hissed. "I'm going to hunt them down and tear their arms off." All, who are you?" The woman blinked, registering the robed figure for the first time. The robed one ignored her, instead gazing into her eyes. "You will suffice," was all it said, and tapped its finger against the space between the woman's eyes. The wreckage disappeared. The robed figure found itself in a stone chamber. A tower. It glanced out the window, taking in the rocky shore and stormy seas. And, just on the edge of a horizon, a green land of warmth and light, beckoning, yet impossibly far away. It turned and floated down a dark stairwell, descending into the depths of the tower. It heard screams, not of pain, or of fear, but of outrage, accompanied by the clink of chains and the thud of flesh striking metal. "Give up," a voice echoed up the stairs, a voice like broken glass. "You are mine." Fool. It was the voice of a young girl. Pain and outrage clashed in the voice, but there was no hint fear, no trace of despair. "I am a mage, a fairy tale. We do not give up, we do not stop, I will be free again, and I will destroy you. You are mine." The figure came into a chamber. Here was a girl with hair like fire, chained to a wall behind bars of iron. The girl struggled, the chains pulled taut as she banged her feet against the bars. In front of her, leering down from outside the cell, was a creature of green scales, malice, and filth. The robed one came to a stop behind the demon, floating just above its shoulder. The girl saw her and stopped struggling, just for a moment, to stare. The demon noticed. It turned and saw the robe. "Oi, who the hell are? Be gone." A tiny ball of cold fire shot from the robes and enveloped the demon. It died soundlessly, writhing as the flames crackled without noise up and down its body, leaving nothing, not even ash. A hand gestured and the iron bars disappeared. There was a click, and the shackles fell from the girl's hands. The girl rubbed her chafed wrists, glaring at the floating robe. "Who are you?" she demanded, straightening. As she did so, the girl grew taller, the rags adorning her fell away to be replaced by shining plates of steel. And then there was a young woman, strong of body with eyes like armor plating. There was no response. The woman's eyes narrowed. "I asked you a question." "Indeed." Two elegant hands rose and pulled back the hood, revealing a face of alien beauty. High cheekbones and raven hair framed eyes of burning emerald. There was a rustling and two wings unfolded from the figure's back. They were translucent and gossamer, shining with a light all their own. Urza gaped. "A fairy," she breathed. "Yes," the robed woman said, her eyes imperious. "I am Titania, and I would have word with you, Urza Scarlet." Urza said nothing. "I seek a champion to fight in my name to, what are you doing?" Urza froze guiltily, her cheeks coloring. She had been bending down slightly, peering at the bottom of the fairy's robe. "I, was trying to see if you had," she trailed off. "A what?" Titania's voice was cold. "Nothing," Urza said quickly. "It's not important." Titania stared at her. "Do you wish for the power to fight the demons?" Urza straightened. "Yes." "Good. Then let us begin." Titania touched a finger to the woman's brow and everything disappeared. She awoke with a start. The Titania stood before her, flanked by a wizened all-witch. Urza stared at the woman for a short moment before her memories suddenly came flooding back. "Baba. Right. You know, when all this is over we are really going to have to discuss payment for all this trouble you've caused me. Never have I seen someone misuse one of my presents so badly before." Hush, there is no time to discuss that right now. Even as we speak your comrades are going to try and confront the demon flute. Goku, Loxus and Kagura are battling her directly while the rest are trying to divert focus with attacks all over the city. But those three aren't going to be able to win on their own, and the rest are only going to be able to last for so long. If we delay, they may very well die. Urza's eyes narrowed and she immediately drew her sword and prepared to charge out. The tiny witch darted in front of her, a huge scowl on her face. Where the hell do you think you're going? My comrades are in trouble. I'm going to help them. Of course you are, but if you just charge in right now, you're going to get mind controlled or possessed again, and we aren't going to bother with someone dumb enough to let the same shit happen to them twice. Urza growled in annoyance, but still she stayed and glanced between the two. But you've already freed me once, surely you could give me some sort of protection to stop it from happening again. This time it was the Titania who answered her. You shall receive no further help from me. What happens next will be your test to see if you shall be worth my aid in the future. If you want to stop the bigger threat further on, then you need to prove you can stand on your own. Urza's brow furrowed in thought before she slowly nodded. Very well, if I need to, I shall do anything to save my guild. But if you will not help me any further here, then what do you suggest? A friend of yours has also been freed from control, and has regained a level of power just shy of your own. Baba said. Mira, she's okay, why else would I mention her? Right, now I need you to track her down and bring her over here. For what purpose? Does she have some manner of preventing the possession that I am unaware of? In a manner of speaking. Just bring her back over here, girl. Once you get back, the Titania and I are going to teach you how to dance. She snapped back to awareness. The very first thing that she noticed was that she was using her Satan soul. The heady rush of dark power flowing through her body was unmistakable. The second thing she noticed was her brother standing over her. Her face lit up in a warm smile and she began to laugh. Elfman, it's good to see you, I'm back. What's going on, is everyone okay? How long have I been out? The silence hung for a moment as Mirajane expectantly waited for her younger sibling to answer her, or hug her, or say how manly it was that she was back. It was then that Mirajane noticed that Elfman wasn't truly looking at her. His eyes were nearly closed, and what little she could see looked completely glazed over. Mirajane stared up at her brother, her brain unable to process what she was seeing. Then she finally noticed the sticky warm feeling around her hand. Something inside her was sinking and she allowed her gaze to fall. Her own hand was wrist deep within her brother's guts. Crimson was pouring out around her fingers, dripping down his chest and onto the ever-growing puddle that was expanding around them. Elfman, Mirajane whispered in horror. Her gaze was locked onto the wound, so much so that she jumped when a giant hand landed onto her shoulder. Elfman winced as the sudden motion jolted his insides. Ever so gently, he guided his sister's arm back and pulled her arm from the hole. The stream of blood instantly doubled, but he still gave a relieved sigh. Still holding his Mirajane's hand in his own, his other arm came up to pat the shorter girl on the head. Blinking through tears, Mira looked up once more onto her grinning brother's face. Glad to have you back, sis, he whispered. Then, with a low moan he fell backwards and lay still. Elfman.
Thanks for listening. If you want the next part of this video, be sure to like, subscribe and comment and hit that bell notification. See you next time.